Welcome to Windchime Storytime.
I'm David.
And I'm Reese.
Today we are reading Raggedy Ann and Andy, the Taffy Pull.
Let's meet the dollies in the nursery as they decide to cook up a sweet treat.
I know how we can have a whole lot of fun.
Raggedy Andy said to the other dolls.
We'll have a taffy pull. Do you mean hack the whip, Raggedy Andy?
Asked the French doll.
He means a tug of war, don't you, Raggedy Andy?
Asked Henny.
No.
Raggedy Andy replied.
I mean a taffy pull. If it's lots of fun, then show us how to play the game.
Uncle Clem said.
We like to have fun, don't we?
And Uncle Clem turned to all the other dolls as he asked the question.
It really is not a game,
Raggedy Andy explained.
You see, it is only a taffy pull. We take sugar and water and butter and a little vinegar and put it all in the stove to cook. When it is cooked until it strings way out when you dip some up in a spoon, or gets hard when you drop some in a cup of water, then it's candy. Then it must be placed upon buttered plates until it is cooled a little, and each one takes some of the candy and pulls until it gets real white. Then it's called taffy.
That will be loads of fun. Show us how to begin. Let's have a taffy pull. Come on, everybody. The dolls cried. Just one moment, Raggedy Ann said. She had remained quiet before, for she had been thinking very hard, so hard, in fact, that 2 stitches had burst in the back of her rag head. The dolls, in their eagerness to have the taffy pull, were dancing around Raggedy Ann, and when Raggedy Ann spoke, in her soft, cottony voice, they all quieted down and waited for her to speak again. I was just thinking, Raggedy Ann said, that it would be very nice to have the taffy pull. But suppose some of the folks smell the candy while it is cooking.
There's no one at home,
Raggedy Andy said.
I thought of that, Raggedy Ann. They have all gone over to Cousin Jenny's house and will not be back until day after tomorrow. I heard Mama tell Marcella.
If that is the case, we can have the taffy pull and all the fun that goes with it, Raggedy Ann cried as she started for the nursery door. After her ran all the dollies, their little feet pitter-pattering across the floor and down the hall. When they came to the stairway, Raggedy Ann, Raggedy Andy, Uncle Clem, and Henny threw themselves down the stairs, turning over and over as they fell. The other dolls, having china heads, had to be much more careful, so they slid down the banisters or jumped from one step to another. Raggedy Ann, Raggedy Andy, Uncle Clem, and Henny piled in a heap at the bottom of the steps, and by the time they had untangled themselves and helped each other up, the other dolls were down the stairs. To the kitchen they all raced. There they found the fire in the stove still burning. Raggedy Andy brought a small stew kettle, while the others brought the sugar and water and a large spoon. They could not find the vinegar and decided not to use it anyway. Raggedy Andy stood above the stove and watched the candy, dipping into it every once in a while to see if it had cooked long enough, and stirring it with a large spoon. At last, the candy began to string out from the spoon when it was held above the stew kettle, and after trying a few drops in a cup of cold water, Raggedy Andy pronounced it done. Uncle Clem pulled out a large platter from the pantry, and Raggedy Ann dipped her rag hand into the butter jar and buttered the platter. The candy, when it was poured into the platter, was a lovely golden color and smelled delicious to the dolls. Henny could not wait until it cooled, so he put one of his chamois skin hands into the hot candy. Of course it did not burn Henny, But when he pulled his hand out again, it was covered with a great ball of candy, which strung out all over the kitchen floor and got upon his clothes. Then, too, the candy cooled quickly, and in a very short time, Henny's hand was encased in a hard ball of candy. Henny couldn't wiggle any of his fingers on that hand, and he was sorry he had been so hasty. While waiting for the candy to cool, Raggedy Andy said,
"We must rub butter upon our hands before we pull the candy, or else it will stick to our hands as it has done to Henny's hands and have to wear off." "Will this hard ball of candy have to wear off my hand?"
Henny asked.
"It is so hard I cannot wiggle any of my fingers." "It will either have to wear off, or you'll have to soak your hand in water for a long time until the candy on it melts,"
said Raggedy Andy.
"Dear me,"
said Henny. Uncle Clem brought the poker then, and, asking Henny to put his hand upon the stove leg, he gave the hard candy a few sharp taps with the poker and chipped the candy from Henny's hand.
"Thank you, Uncle Clem,"
Henny said as he wiggled his fingers.
"That feels much better."
Raggedy Andy told all the dolls to rub butter upon their hands.
"The candy's getting cool enough to pull,"
he said. Then, when all the dolls had their hands nice and buttery, Raggedy Andy cut them each a nice piece of candy and showed them how to pull it.
"Take it in one hand this way,"
he said,
"and pull it with the other hand like this."
When all the dolls were supplied with the candy, they sat about and pulled it, watching it grow whiter and more silvery the longer they pulled. Then, when the taffy was real white, it began to grow harder and harder, so the smaller dolls could scarcely pull it any more. When this happened, Raggedy Andy, Raggedy Ann, Uncle Clem, and Henny, who were larger, took the little doll's candy and mixed it with what they had been pulling until all the taffy was snow white. Then Raggedy Andy pulled it out into a long rope and held it while Uncle Clem hit the ends with a sharp tap with the edge of a spoon. Then snipped the taffy into small pieces, just as easy as you might break icicles with a few sharp taps of a stick. The small pieces of white taffy were placed upon the buttered platter again, and the dolls all danced about it, singing and laughing, for this had been the most fun that they had had for a long, long time. "But what should we do with it?" Raggedy Ann asked.
"Yes, what shall we do with it?"
Uncle Clem said.
"We can't let it remain in the platter here upon the kitchen floor. We must hide it, or do something with it."
"While we're trying to think of a way to dispose of it, let us be washing the stew kettle and the spoons," said practical Raggedy Ann.
"That is a very happy thought, Raggedy Ann,"
said Raggedy Andy.
"for it will clean the butter and candy from our hands while we're doing it."
So the stew kettle was dragged to the sink and filled with water, and the dolls all taking turns scraping the candy from the sides of the kettle and scrubbing the inside with a cloth. When the kettle was nice and clean and had been wiped dry, Raggedy Andy found a roll of waxed paper in the pantry upon one of the little shelves.
"We'll wrap each piece of taffy in a nice little piece of paper,"
he said.
"Then we'll find a nice paper bag and put all the pieces inside the bag and throw it from the upstairs window when someone passes the house so that someone may have the candy."
All the dolls gathered about the platter on the floor, and while Raggedy Andy cut the paper into neat squares, the dolls wrapped the taffy in the papers. Then the taffy was put into a large bag, and with much pulling and tugging, it was finally dragged up into the nursery, where a window faced out towards the street. Then, just as a little boy and a little girl, who looked as though they did not ever have much candy, passed the house, and the dolls all gave a push and sent the bag tumbling to the sidewalk. The two children laughed and shouted, "Thank you!" when they saw that the bag contained candy, and the dolls, peeping from behind the lace curtains, watched the two happy-faced children eating the taffy as they skipped down the street. When the children had passed out of sight, The dolls climbed down from the window.
That was lots of fun,
said the French doll as she smoothed her skirt and sat down beside Raggedy Andy.
I believe Raggedy Andy must have a candy heart too, like Raggedy Ann,
said Uncle Clem.
No,
Raggedy Andy answered.
I'm just stuffed with white cotton, and I have no candy heart, but someday perhaps I shall have.
A candy heart is very nice, Raggedy Ann said. You know, she had one. But one can be just as nice and happy and full of sunshine without a candy heart.
I almost forgot to tell you,
said Raggedy Andy,
that when pieces of taffy are wrapped in little pieces of paper, just as we wrap them, they are called kisses.
Thanks for listening to Wind Chime Storytime.
Have a pleasant day.
And the next adventure's on the way.
Bye.